Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be diving into something pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It really shows how connected everything is on our planet. We're
Yeah.
talking about a powerful earthquake
Mhm.
that started in the Caribbean Sea. And we've got two reports on it.
Yeah.
One from the Louisville Courier-Journal and the other from CBS News.
Interesting.
And get this, the tremors from this earthquake
Wow.
were picked up on a seismograph over 1,500 miles away in Kentucky.
That's incredible. 1,500 miles away.
That's wild, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about like forces of nature rippling across huge distances.
It really is fascinating, and it just goes to show how powerful these events can be and how everything on Earth is connected in ways we don't always think about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's get into the specifics.
Okay.
This earthquake happened on February 8th, 2025, and it measured a massive 7.6 on the magnitude scale. It struck north of Honduras and southwest of the Cayman Islands.
Okay.
And it was so strong that it actually set off tsunami alerts for the islands in that area. Thankfully, the tsunami threat passed,
Yeah.
but that just adds to how intense this whole thing was.
Right, and the U.S. Geological Survey said that this earthquake was caused by what they call strike-slip faulting.
Strike slip faulting.
Yeah, it sounds kind of complicated,
Yeah.
but basically imagine two giant blocks of the Earth's crust sliding past each other horizontally.
Okay.
So that's basically what happened near the boundary of the North American and Caribbean plates, and it released a ton of energy.
So picture like two massive slabs of rock, miles thick, just grinding against each other.
Exactly.
That image really helps understand just how big this was.
Mhm.
And it turns out this area is known for these kinds of events.
It is. The reports say that just in the last century, there have been at least 10 other earthquakes
Wow.
of a similar magnitude in that same area, all within about 150 miles of each other.
So it happens a lot.
It's a real reminder that our planet is constantly moving and shifting, even if we don't always feel it.
And speaking of feeling it, that brings us to the Kentucky connection.
Yeah.
A seismograph in Sonora, Kentucky, which is over 1,500 miles from where the earthquake actually picked up the tremors.
Wow.
That distance is just mind-boggling. Makes you realize how sensitive these instruments are and how an event that seems so far away can still have effects that reach us.
It really is like a ripple effect. You know, and speaking of Kentucky, the Courier-Journal article mentioned something really interesting. The New Madrid seismic zone.
Oh, yeah.
This zone covers western Kentucky and a few other nearby states, and it's actually been showing more seismic activity lately.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Kentucky has its own earthquake worries.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
It might surprise you, but the New Madrid seismic zone has a history of some pretty powerful earthquakes.
Really?
And this recent increase in activity, even though it's not related to the Caribbean earthquake, is a good reminder that seismic activity isn't just limited to one region.
So this is already teaching me things I didn't know. And if you're finding this as fascinating as I am, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into these captivating topics. Now back to Kentucky. What can you tell us about this New Madrid seismic zone?
Well, what's fascinating about the New Madrid seismic zone is that it's not on a plate boundary, like where this Caribbean earthquake happened. It's right in the middle of the North American plate.
Wait, so earthquakes can happen even when you're not near those plate boundaries we always hear about?
Exactly. The forces inside the Earth's plates can cause stress to build up, and sometimes that stress is released in the form of earthquakes, even in places that seem pretty stable.
Okay, that's a little unsettling.
Mhm.
So if we've got this active seismic zone in Kentucky, what does that mean for people who live there? What kind of risks are we talking about?
Well, the risks from any earthquake depend on a few things, like how strong the earthquake is, how close you are to the epicenter, and how well buildings are built in the area. But the New Madrid zone has had some big earthquakes in the past. Back in the early 1800s, there were a bunch of powerful earthquakes that they think were well over magnitude 7, and those earthquakes were felt over a huge area.
Wow, that's intense. So even though this recent Caribbean earthquake and the activity in the New Madrid zone aren't related, they both kind of remind us that we need to be aware of earthquake risks no matter where we live.
Right. Absolutely. And it's not just about being aware of the risks, it's also about being prepared. You probably have a smoke detector in your home, right?
Yeah, of course. Just basic safety.
Exactly. And getting ready for earthquakes is kind of like that. It's about taking steps to make sure that if something happens, even if it's not likely, you're ready.
So what are some practical things people can do to be better prepared?
Well, the first thing is to have a plan. Talk with your family about what you would do if an earthquake happened. Where would you meet? How would you get in touch if the phones aren't working? Having a plan can really help if things start shaking.
That makes sense. It's like having a fire drill, but for an earthquake.
Exactly. And then there's the practical stuff, like having an emergency kit ready. This kit should have things like water food that doesn't need to be cooked, a first aid kit, and other important things you might need if you don't have power or can't get to stores for a few days.
So have a plan. Have an emergency kit. What else?
It's also good to know your surroundings. If you live in an area where earthquakes are a risk, know where the safe places are in your home, like under sturdy furniture or away from windows. And look around your home for things that could be dangerous during an earthquake, like bookcases that could fall over or heavy things on high shelves. Making sure these things are secure can make a big difference in preventing damage and injuries.
This is really helpful, and it's make me realize there are a lot of easy things we can do to be more ready. If you're finding this conversation as helpful as I am, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're always diving deep into topics that matter, and we don't want you to miss out. Now, I know we've been talking about what individuals can do, but what about the bigger picture? What role does building construction play in earthquake safety?
Building codes and infrastructure are super important when it comes to minimizing the impact of earthquakes. Buildings that are designed and built to withstand earthquakes can really reduce damage and save lives.
I remember reading in the Courier Journal article about how the New Madrid seismic zone has its own special building codes because of the risk of earthquakes.
That's right. And those codes are always being updated as engineers and scientists learn more about how buildings react to earthquakes. It's an ongoing process, but the goal is to create structures that can hold up better against the forces from earthquakes.
So it's not just about what individuals can do, it's also about everyone working together to create safer communities.
Exactly. And that working together goes beyond just building codes. It also includes things like early warning systems, which can give people a few precious seconds to take cover before the strongest shaking hits.
Speaking of early warnings, I remember the CBS News article mentioned those tsunami warnings that went out after the earthquake in the Caribbean. Luckily, those were canceled, but it must have been scary for people in that area. Are tsunamis something we need to worry about in Kentucky, given the New Madrid seismic zone?
Well, tsunamis are mainly a risk for coastal areas. They're giant waves caused by the movement of water, often from earthquakes that happen underwater. While Kentucky isn't on the coast, the Mississippi River flows right through the New Madrid seismic zone. A big earthquake could cause landslides or other problems along the river, which could lead to flooding. So even though tsunamis aren't the main concern in Kentucky, it's still important to understand that there could be secondary hazards like flooding.
That makes sense. So we've got personal preparedness, building codes, early warning systems, potential problems like flooding. So it sounds like we need to do a lot of different things to really be prepared for earthquakes.
You got it. And we can't forget about the importance of scientific research. The more we learn about how earthquakes work, the better we can predict when and where they might happen, figure out how bad they could be, and design buildings and warning systems to keep people safe.
And I bet technology is a big part of that research.
Mm.
We have all sorts of advanced sensors and ways to analyze data.
Absolutely. Advances in seismology, data analysis, and modeling are allowing scientists to understand a lot more about how, when, and where earthquakes happen. This information is really important for improving building codes, developing early warning systems, and ultimately making these powerful events less impactful.
It's amazing to think about how all these different things, from what individuals can do to scientific research, are all connected when it comes to earthquake safety. It reminds us that we're all part of a bigger system, and what we do and what we know can make a real difference.
That's a great point, and I think it highlights the fact that while earthquakes can be scary and destructive events, knowledge and preparation are our best defense against the unpredictable nature of our planet. Whether it's having a plan, knowing your local risks, or just understanding the science behind these events, knowledge helps us to act instead of just reacting. It gives us a sense of control when we're dealing with something that might otherwise feel completely out of our hands.
I like that knowledge helps us to act instead of just reacting. That's powerful. And it's true not just for earthquakes, but for so many things we face in life. We've covered a lot in this deep dive, from the details of that powerful earthquake in the Caribbean to what it means for being prepared for earthquakes right here in Kentucky. As we wrap up, is there one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that understanding and being prepared are the best ways to protect ourselves from earthquakes. Whether it's having a plan, knowing the risks where you live, or simply understanding the science behind these events, knowledge gives us the power to act rather than just react.
It's amazing, isn't it? When we started this whole deep dive, I was just really interested in the fact that an earthquake in the Caribbean Sea could be felt all the way in Kentucky.
Yeah.
But as we've talked about it, it's become so much more than that one event. It's made me think about just how powerful nature is and how connected our planet is.
Yeah.
It's also made me realize I don't know as much about earthquake preparedness as I thought I did.
I think a lot of people feel that way. We often don't really understand something until it affects us directly. And even though we can't control when or where earthquakes happen, we can control how prepared we are for them.
That's good to hear. It makes me feel like I can do something. So for our listeners who might be feeling a little overwhelmed with all this information, what would you say is the most important thing to remember?
I'd say the most important thing is that knowledge is power. The more we know about earthquakes, the better we can make smart choices about our safety and well-being. Start by learning about the risks in your specific area. Do some research on the New Madrid seismic zone. Look into the history of earthquakes in Kentucky and understand what you can do to be safe.
That's great advice. Knowledge really is the key to being prepared. And if you're feeling inspired to take action after this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're always exploring new topics and taking a closer look at the things that matter. But before we go, I want to talk about something that's been on my mind. We've talked a lot about the science and the practical things we can do, but what about the human side of things? I can't even imagine what it must be like to experience a really big earthquake.
It's definitely a powerful experience, and it's important to remember the emotional and psychological effects that earthquakes can have on people and communities. Even if there isn't any physical damage, just feeling the ground shake and the fear and uncertainty that comes after can be really upsetting.
It makes you realize how powerful nature is and how vulnerable we are.
That's true. But it also shows how strong the human spirit is. We see communities come together time and time again after earthquakes to help each other rebuild and recover. People are incredibly compassionate and supportive after these events.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. It reminds us that even when we're faced with these incredible forces of nature, we have the strength to overcome challenges and support each other. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us. You've given us a lot to think about and a lot to do.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration. We hope you found this deep dive informative and helpful. Until next time, keep learning about the world around you and never stop exploring.